Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. As is already broken across the assorted nooks and crannies of the internet, VRC have released version 1.0 of their already very famous McLaren MP4 22 mod for Assetto Corsa. This mod is very interesting to me personally because it represents the first time with Ferrariman601 that I've been able to follow the progress in development of a high-quality mod from its inception all the way up to its completion, at least as it is right now in version 1.0. As far as I'm able to extrapolate, VRC began development on the MP4 22 at some point mid to late 2016, and the first version of the car that was released in any form, version 0.1 beta, came out in January 2017, at which time I did a review of it. Of course, more recently, the car has continued to be developed, and we got an updated version of it, version 0.3 beta, in January 2018, and I did a follow-up review video of it at that time. Here, though, version 1.0, this is free to the public, and I'll have a link up for the race department page where you can download this car for yourself if you so desire. But really, it's been a very eye-opening experience to follow the development of this car from start to finish, and of course, to be in contact with the VRC guys and to get to know them a little bit, and of course to work with them for the hot lap competitions that we've been doing. Really, it's been a very interesting experience to be able to talk to these guys and figure out how they actually put a car together, and just to understand to some extent the sheer amount of work that is required to put together a mod of this caliber. I remember saying in January 2017 with the 0.1 beta review of this car that it was just so perfect at that time, and of course as the car continued to develop we saw it become even more perfect, and now it has reached 1.0, and really I have to say the comparison between 0.1 beta and now 1.0 public release, it is like night and day, even though the first ever proto spec of this car, 0.1 beta, was already fantastic. But since then, VRC completely overhauled the 3D model. Essentially, they rebuilt the car entirely between version 0.1 and version 0.3, and now 1.0. They've taken that 0.3 model and they've just honed it a little bit. They've refined some of the textures, they've corrected some of the errors that were there in the 0.3 release, and now in 1.0, the car is 100% ready for the world, and already I'm seeing on YouTube many of you have already begun to enjoy this car, for those of you who did not get that closed beta release before. Definitely, it is a great addition to Assetto Corsa, and I'm very happy now that it has gone public. VRC, of course, maintaining true to their promise that 1.0 and above on all of their mods are released for free to the general public. So definitely hats off to the VRC guys, and thank you to the VRC guys not only for your great work but also for being transparent and for being open with the whole process from start to finish of creating these wonderful cars for all of us to enjoy. Also, thank you to the VRC guys for the opportunity to give feedback, and I can definitely see that you are taking the suggestions of the beta testers and the assorted other people who've been posting videos of your mods and reaching out to you on your social sites and also on your forum, where you've got these sections for giving feedback and tips and suggestions for future development. You're definitely taking all of that into consideration, and it really is a very invigorating, very encouraging thing to see a modding team being receptive to the feedback of the general public and incorporating that feedback as best as they can into a finished product. So definitely this is an example of what a good modding team can do, and really the car speaks for itself. Just look at it here. What I don't want to do in this video is to give another in-depth review of the car and talk about its history and all of that, because I've done that on two prior occasions up to this point. The 0.1 video and the 0.3 video are up, and you can take a look at them if you would like. Really, there's not so much different between 0.3 and 1.0 in a macrocosmic sense in terms of the overall characteristics of the chassis dynamics and engine power and things like that. The RC basically had all of that set in stone by 0.3, as far as I can tell from a driving perspective. I'm sure that other things have happened under the skin, but I don't think it's quite warranted to go so in depth with this video. What I'd just like to do in this one, though, is basically just show you what has changed from version 0.3 beta to 1.0, and of course we'll gawk at some of the details that VRC have spiffed up a bit on this one, and of course when we drive the car, basically just a little bit of a setup guide, I suppose, in terms of how you can extract the maximum from this car. If you are still running an older version of it, you will notice that the handling dynamics have changed a little bit, but they've definitely changed for the better, and we'll get into that. As we can see here in showroom view though, the model essentially unchanged from 0.3 spec to 1.0 spec, but it's a big step up from 1.0 or 0.1, yes, 0.1, not 1.0, this is 1.0. Anyway, big step up from 0.1 beta, the first guys of this car. This model, completely different, very much refined in terms of the shapes and the sizes and the textures and all of that. So definitely an improvement. If you are still running the 0.1 beta specification on this car, go get 1.0 now. In any regard though, you can see the car here in Fernando Alonso's livery. We have 3 liveries with which we can run the 422, and you've already seen one of them in my shakedown video at Catalunya. However, we've got Alonso's livery, as you can see here. Here's Lewis Hamilton's, the only real differences being the number 2 on the nose cone instead of the number 1, and the yellow T-bar instead of the red one, as you can see on Alonso's livery. And interestingly enough, VRC have chosen to include this livery. This is the race livery from 2006. Of course, this car never ran with this livery. This is what you would have seen on the MP4 21 from the 2006 season. But VRC have chosen to include this because at the end of 2006, Mika Häkkinen participated in a test session with McLaren in the MP4 21, and of course it would have had this livery. And Mika Häkkinen, at the time, people were thinking maybe he's considering a return to Formula 1, or maybe not. Turned out, maybe not. But Mika Häkkinen did drive the 421 in Spain at the end of 2006, and it had a livery on it quite like this. Of course, when you drive the car, you'll have Mika Häkkinen's helmet in there, not Alonso's or Hamilton's, and you've got the 2006 livery. So it's an interesting little thing that VRC chose to include, and I definitely appreciate it. Those of you who know definitely are aware that I have a little bit of a soft spot for Mika Häkkinen. He's one of my favorite drivers in all of Formula 1 history, so definitely a very good thing that we have the choice to run as Mika Häkkinen if we really want to. Anyway, though, we'll return to one of the 2007 race liveries here, and we can just take a look at some of the other details on the car. The model, as I said, not much different from 0.3 beta spec, but just refined a little bit here and there. Notice carbon texturing around the exhaust outlets there. Just little things like that that have really brought it up to the proper 1.0 specification, and certainly it is now ready for the world in terms of public release. Other details, though, that we started to see in 0.3 beta and weren't quite ready for the world, now they are ready for the world. There are some details externally on the car in an aerodynamic sense that we can play with a little bit. On 0.3 beta, VRC introduced the possibility of running alternate nose cones and alternate front wings on the 422, and they implemented those features very well. There were some texture errors, though, that were a little bit detracting from the overall ability to change those aerodynamic appendages. They've remedied them for 1.0, and thankfully, they've maintained that ability. There was some talk from VRC that maybe they would remove the capacity to change the front wing or change the nose cones, but they haven't done that, and I'm very happy that they've chosen to maintain those features. First off, though, you can see the Viking horns around either side of the snorkel there. Press 0 on the number pad on your keyboard, and you can delete them if you would like. And notice when you do that, the shadows cast by those Viking horns also go away. So here with them installed, you can see a shadow just intersecting the leftmost star on the Mercedes-Benz logo there on the engine cover. Hit 0, and that shadow is gone, as are the Viking horns. So very well implemented there. I'm not sure if there's really a performance change when you change these aero components in the setup screen, but visually, of course, there is a big difference. Additionally, the nose cone and the front wing, we can change the specifications of these as well. Press the number 1 on your number pad on your keyboard. You can see the bridge wing element goes away, and then, of course, you can bring it back if you would like. The car debuted in a specification more or less like this, without that bridge element on the front wing. And then the bridge element was installed on the car when McLaren started to update the MP4 22 into its B specification. Spanish Grand Prix, we saw that bridge wing, and it was a little bit controversial because it had some flexion toward the nose at high speed. But you can choose whether or not you would like to run with that bridge wing. In addition, you can also choose the nose cone specification you want. Press number 2 on the numpad, and you can see the nose cone changes. Interesting little motion there in terms of how it actually changes, but you can see this is the default nose cone that the car loads up with. Press number 2 on the numpad, and then you end up with this one. It is a little bit more drooped. It curves down a little bit more sharply to meet up with the front wing, so you can see the nose tip is a bit lower on this version than it is on this version. And then, of course, if you would like, you can also run the bridge wing with either nose cone specification. Really, it just depends on your taste. I believe that the car debuted with this nose tip on it, the lower one and the slightly narrower one, and then when McLaren introduced the front wing, they also brought in the second nose tip there. But I could be wrong on that, don't quote me on that, but you can run the car in either specification if you so desire. Also, we can't do it in showroom view, but when we get out on track, you'll see in the setup screen, we can change the specification of the canard winglets on the size of the monocoque, so we'll definitely look at that in the setup screen on track as well. Overall, though, the model pretty much the same. The only other detail that we can interact with in showroom view is the rain light. Press number 7 on the numpad and you can turn the rain light on or off, just like we've seen on other specifications of this car. Very nicely modeled, very nicely detailed. Each individual LED element in there is modeled in both its on and off state. You can also see the little plexiglass cover over those lighting elements, replete with the fasteners holding it on. Absolutely lovely detail. Of course, the other details on the rear zone basically carried over from version 0.3 beta. You can see the starter hole there down the center of the diffuser. Very nice detail. That debuted, I believe, in 0.3 beta. Very, very nice indeed. Of course, the cockpit will be driving the car from the cockpit, but just going in, you can see that things are more or less unchanged in here. Just all of the details that you can imagine, here they are, very nicely rendered for all of us to gawk at. Of course, the steering wheel detail is very nice, and once the car is alive, we'll have information about our speed, gear, and fuel load on the dash in those 3 LCD displays, and then, of course, shift lights across the top in there. Mirrors work, the sight lines are very nice across the front and sides of the car, so you can definitely place it very, very easily. I really like all of that. Of course, though, we do have to go and drive this car, so we're going to do that at Silverstone for our viewing pleasure, and we'll see you there in a moment. Welcome to Silverstone. Before we get out on track, of course, let's have a look through the setup screen and show you what's going on here in version 1.0 of VRC's McLaren MP4 22. Here on the gear display, you'll notice that really nothing has changed. We've got the entire gearbox, 1st through 7th gear, plus your final drive ratio there to your heart's content for adjustment. Tires, we have got our 4 tire compounds to choose from, ranging from the Bridgestone Super Soft all the way up to the Bridgestone Hards. Remember, those controlled tires introduced in 2007, and they are grooved. 4 grooves cut in the tread surface there of the tires. Mediums are your default, 13 psi on the front, 12 psi on the rear. You have got an adjustment range on the front from 11 psi all the way up to 15, and on the rears you have got that same adjustment, 11 psi all the way up to 15. Fuel load, we've got it zeroed out here to keep the engine quiet. Maximum capacity, 120 liters. And also, you will notice that there are some different sounds externally on this car. That is different from version 0.3 beta and, of course, version 0.1 beta. You've heard those sounds already in a couple other videos that I've done of this car. At the end of this video, there will be hot laps, and you'll be able to hear them more clearly for yourself. Electronics, traction control settings, and engine brake settings. Their default is 5. VRC tends to go in reverse in their traction control. In Assetto Corsa default, the lower number is the stronger assist, but in VRC cars, for the most part, the higher number is the stronger assist. So just basically reverse your psychology in terms of how you interface with the traction control adjustments on VRC cars. Of course, 2007 traction control was run in Formula 1, and we are going to be running it here. Aero, front and rear wing adjustments, just like we saw on 0.3 beta. On this version, you can also see that the flaps do change their visual angle as you ramp the downforce up and down, both on the front and on the rear as well. There you go. It's a little bit harder to see on the rear wing, but if we can get a better angle there, you can see the flap does change its angle there, the main plane, depending on what you do with those settings. Alignment, camber, and toe on all 4 corners, default values shown there. Dampers, your bound and rebound, fast and slow. Drivetrain, your differential adjustments in power coast and preload. Generic, this is your rev limiter. Defaults at 100 out of 100, goes down to 95 if you do want to detune your engine slightly. You might do that on shorter circuits, places where you might not really need to wind out all the gears, so places like Monaco, for example, you might want to ratchet the rev limiter down just a little bit. Other than that, brake bias, brake power, and steering assist, your power steering there. Suspensions, here's your more detailed suspension settings, anti-roll bars front and rear, your heave rate, so that's the 3rd spring, travel range on that heave spring as well, and then your ride heights on all 4 corners, as well well as your wheel rates. Visual mods. Here is where we start to play a little bit. We mentioned those aero tweaks in the showroom view, but here on track you can also make those aero tweaks. Yes, fins, no. Your first setting there defaults to 0. Watch the Viking horns on either side of the airbox, if we can sort of see them there. Yep, kind of. Set it to 1, the Viking horns disappear. Set it back to 0, and they're on the car again. Front wing type. Watch the front wing now. You see the bridge wing in place at 0. You go to 1, the bridge wing goes away. Nose cone type. We'll take the bridge wing away so you can see this a little bit more clearly. Here it's set to 0, and you can see it's got the low, narrow nose on it. Set it to type 1, and it's got the lower, narrower nose on it. So you've got 2 nose cones that you can run as well. And the cockpit fins. You've got a multiple settings here. You can see 0, those default canards there. Set it to 1, and you see the smaller canard wings there. This is more or less launch spec for the 422. And then you go to 2, and you can see smaller canards still, and setting 3, no canards at all. So you've got basically 4 ways that you can play with the canards there. You can have these, which are the latest versions. You can have small ones, you can have smaller ones, and you can have none of them. So we'll run it at default as well. In fact, on this first run, we will do the entire thing in default setup. We will reload that. And there we go. Default fuel load is 40 liters, and that's where we will begin our running today. In the cockpit, the car is now alive. You can see the gear display on the dashboard. On the left, you have your speed in kilometers per hour, and on the right, you've got your fuel level in liters, 40 liters, as we saw sitting there in the pit screen. Additionally, I've got overlays of the pedals in the lower left, and the lap time is counting up in the upper left. In terms of our instrumentation in the car, that is all we have got. Steering wheel model looks very nice, now loaded up on track, as do all of the reflections and your mirror detail as well, which we'll see a little bit more clearly once our pit stop menu goes away and we get out on the track. Out of the pit lane and onto the racetrack here in 1.0 spec of the 422 by VRC. In our most recent review piece of this car, we ran it at Silverstone in 0.3 beta, so again, not really looking to do any extended running, just going to give you some pointers in terms of how you've got to identify with this car and adapt yourself to running with it. Notice doing a little bit of weaving here down the infield straight, just trying to build some temperature into those tires. Going to be overcooking the front end as well a little bit, just trying to build temperature into those tires, get a little bit more flexibility in the sidewall. You can hear the internal cockpit sounds here, basically unchanged. I thought they were very good to begin with, and they're still very good. They're the same sounds that we got in version 0.3. Already flat through the Maggots and Beckett's complex. Bit of understeer there on the front axle, coming on to hanger straight. That's pretty par for the course in pretty much any modern Formula car. Down hanger straight, 305, 310 clicks. Big bumps coming into stow. They can catch you out, particularly because that is right on the braking point for the corner, so just watch the bumps. This car has a little bit of a propensity for rear locking. That can catch you out. Caught me out at Imola on the video that went up of the hot laps there. And a nice reverberation effect from between the grandstands and the pit wall there on the start-finish straight. Tricky stop-start infield section at this 2010 configuration of Silverstone. I'm divided personally on this track configuration. I miss Bridge Corner, I really do. However, the infield straight is pretty nice. Bit of oversteer, yes. Traction control helping me out there. However, default setup, it is definitely a little bit biased toward understeer. However, neutral oversteer also possible. High-speed corners, basically no oversteer or understeer to speak of. The car is definitely in a stable position for development.
Big bumps coming into stow. There they are. Just watch out for them a little bit. And then understeer in the medium speed corners. .132.709, not too bad for a first lap on default. All the instrumentation in the car is nicely legible at a glance. In particular, the shift lights are quite helpful. Obviously, they go from green to red to blue. You change up through the box once those blue lights come on, as is pretty par for the course nowadays. Of course, 7-speed box in this car, the more modern ones with the 8-speed gearboxes, of course with the turbo hybrid power plants, completely different power curve on those engines, so you need to keep them at their working range a little bit more stringently, hence the extra gear. Of course, that also helps for fuel economy. Gearbox operation is very smooth. Upshifts are practically seamless, downshifts are automatically rev matched for you. No stabbing at the gas or anything like that on the down changes, even though I kind of stab at the gas anyway sometimes. And you can see there just bouncing off the rev limiter over the bumps. Not much you could do about that, really. It's a momentary thing. And that understeer again. Nice throttle blip sound effect on the downshifts as well. The revs have got to be in the right place for that to happen. It doesn't happen just by default on every downshift, so it is dependent on where the engine is. Of course, that is quite accurate. You notice they didn't happen there. Braking a bit harder, the revs dropped a little bit more, so it's not just a normally scripted loop sort of sound effect. It is dependent on engine RPM between one gear and the next. All in all, though, once the car is at high speed and you can just pitch it into the corners there, very good aero grip, and for the most part, decent mechanical grip. Default is a little bit squirrely, biased a bit toward understeer, and of course, when you go over the bumps like that, ouch, you bottom the car out and you lose all downforce. However, that's what happens with these kinds of things. Yeah, we don't need to see a replay, thank you. Yes, anyway, back to the pits. We wanted to talk about a little bit of what you can do setup-wise on a car like this, so let's zero out the fuel and show you what's going on here aerodynamically on default. So 12 on the front wing and 6 on the rear. Alignment minus 3.4 camber on the front and minus 1.2 on the rear. Our toe is 10 on the front and 12 on the rear respectively, all four corners. Here are bound and rebound settings there. 12 on the bump on the front, and 10 on the bump on the rear, 12 on the rebound on the front, and 10 on the rebound on the rear. Drivetrain settings are diff in power, coast, and preload, 10 in power, 35 in coast, and 12 Newton meters there on the preload side. Suspension setup, 10,000 Newton meters on the front end roll bar, 30,000 rather on the rear. You can see there what we've got, and that's 100,000 on the front. Man, I can't read today. Anyway, visual mods there. I don't believe that these affect performance at all, but they're all set to 0 at the moment. The setup that I'm going to load is basically a setup that's been carried over from Imola on version 0.3 of the MP4 22. However, you can see 16 on the front wing and 7 on the rear wing, so that's changed a bit. Alignment, camber settings, minus 3.9 on the front and minus 1.5 on the rear. Toe settings are 4 on the front and 12 on the rear. Dampers, basically unchanged there from our default setup there. Drivetrain, I played with the differential a little bit. Diff power 50%, diff coast 24%, and diff preload is down to 5 Newton meters. Generic, haven't changed anything there, and our suspension settings for the most part haven't changed anything there. I have dialed in a little bit more rake onto the car. Visual mods are still all zeroed out. At any regard, you can see what our lap time was last time out at 1:32.709 was our fastest there before we bottomed the car and we spun off into the wall. However, we'll see if we can approach that. Super soft tires now on this car, so we should be going faster. And we will throw 20 liters of fuel on board. Keep all of our instrumentation up from the previous run, and hopefully we'll actually make it back into the pits this time. Basically a qualifying simulation now. If you're wondering what's going through my head and what the procedures are when I post the hot lap videos, well, this is basically what it is. Get a setup loaded, get the car out on track in an install lap, you try to figure out why the front end broke away like that, and hope it doesn't happen on the next run, and just work the tires, try to get some heat into them. And then make sure in particular you make a good end of the lap so that you get some momentum going into the next lap. Yep, Copse Corner is going to be 7th gear, maybe not quite flat, but it's going to be close. And then through Maggots and Beckett's, watch that right-hand apex curve there. Front tires still need a little bit of work. Stowe Corner will do that for us, down hanger straight. Still a little bit understeer through Stowe, however it has been stamped out a little bit with the setup changes. Again, I like a pointy car. This car is a bit more pointy now. Car is very harsh over the exit curbs. Stay away from them if you can. Curbs do pull you in a little bit. A little bit wide of apex there. However, we can carry good momentum on corner exit and just carry it down the infield straight. Under the bridge, 7th gear. Braking just after the sign there with the left-hand arrow on it. A little wide. Yes, lots of oversteer. And just going a little bit wide there through Brooklands was enough to throw me out through Woodcut. So definitely that first sector and going into the second sector here at Silverstone, it is really an area where you need a good rhythm. This lap has not been the best, but we're over half a second up from our previous best time. Carrying less fuel, and we've got the softer tires now. That's to be expected. And a 1:31.542. We can improve on this run. Visibility out of this car is very good, as you can probably tell by now. Looking so far ahead down the racetrack. It's one thing I appreciate about the cockpit layout in this car, in terms of where the shift lights are. They're stationary, mounted to the dashboard, so you don't really have to lower your gaze so much. You can look very far out in front, as I tend to do. My eyes just drifting from apex to exit and then back to the next apex. Very rarely am I ever really looking in the cockpit, so in the peripheral vision there, those bright shift lights really do help. Here's Copse Corner. Flat in 7th, yes. Very, very yes. Up 6.5. Over the bumps. Much up 4th gear on the power as much as we can. Hard over the exit curb, 6th gear. And get on the power, let the traction control stamp out that wheel spin. clip the last apex, go over the exit curbs a little bit, but not too hard. 130.679, seventh gear into the first corner. Flat in seventh, no problem. A little bit wide of apex, but we get on the power a little earlier. Compromise. See what our split time is through sector 1. Anticipating to be up a little. All right, down a 10th. Should be able to make that back. A little bit more conservative there. Seventh gear, Copse Corner was flat in 7th last time. It's flat in 7th this time. Using all of the road. Car hard over the bumps there. You can hear it bottoming. Force feedback does feel nice. No, I'm clipping a little bit. Yeah, down 3.5. One more lap with the fuel load. See if we can make any inroads on the next lap. .31, 459. This is our final lap here with the fuel load. Got our fuel warning. Throw it in a bit hard. Try not to be wide of apex here. We're not on the power. Let the car build momentum. Clip the apex, clip the exit. Let the car accelerate as straight as you can hold it, up 2/10ths. Braking 4th gear, 3rd gear on the power. 2nd gear, Woodcut corner. Come on, on the power. You just wait so long through there for the front end to hook up again. Seventh gear, come on, be flat in 7th. Still is. Best sequence of corners in Formula 1 right here. Over those curbs. Pop 6th. Nice, up 2/10ths, pop 7th. Eat up the rest of Hanger Straight. The bumps break, 6.5, 4. On the power. Use the exit. 6th gear. Brake. Throw it in, clip the apex, get on the power, clip the next apex, on the power again, let the traction control sort everything out for you. Clip the last apex, hit the exit curves, but not too hard. Over the line, 130.883. We lost 2/10ths in the last sector there. And with 1 liter of fuel remaining, I seriously doubt that we'll make it back to the pits at this point. However, you can definitely see that you can start to build a rhythm in this car very quickly. Is it easy to drive? Not really. I mean, if you're experienced in open wheelers and particularly Formula 1 cars, and most particularly this car, as it has been out for over a year now in some form or another, certainly it won't be that big of an adjustment for you. However, if you are among most of the audience, I do assume, and this is your first taste of the 422, don't let it intimidate you, and certainly don't let it scare you. The default setup is reasonable enough. It's not quite what I personally like. It's a little bit too understeery for my liking, but it's certainly something that is completely runnable, both in practice and in a race. And in addition to that, it's just a good solid base for you to get used to driving the car with, and then you can basically you can adapt the car little by little to your personal tastes, and then as you figure out how it works, you can start to get a little bit more ambitious with your setup. And really, this is a very good car for just getting your feet wet in being competitively quick in a modern open wheeler, and just the way that it looks and the way that it sounds, it's something that's very inviting. It's something that has a lot of replay value in and of itself, and of course, even if you're not a McLaren fan, I think you'll appreciate the amount of work and design and really engineering that has gone into this mod, because, well, Just look at it. I said just look at it all the way back a year ago when we reviewed point 1, but here it is at 1.0, and it's still absolutely glorious in its appearance as well as in its performance. And again, I just can't say enough to VRC for the amount of hard work and dedication and, quite honestly, pride that they show in producing all of their mods. And certainly this is not existing in a vacuum. We've got the Williams FW19, which is fantastic. The McLaren MP420, which is my favorite Formula One car ever, both in reality as well as in Assetto Corsa. And, well, it's related to this one. Of course, we've got the Renault R25, and they're working on the Ferrari F310B. And just every car that they are working on right now, and every car that they have already released, even the much maligned Williams FW37, yeah, it's great. Absolutely great. This one fits right up there with the other products that VRC have brought to us, and honestly, I just cannot praise it enough. Thank you very much to these guys for continuing to be dedicated and for continuing to release their 1.0 specifications for free as they have always promised from day one. And really, I can't get enough of this thing. Hats off to all of you once again. However, for everybody who is listening right now, that concludes the commentated portion of this video. There will be hot laps here from external as well as onboard views, just so that you can hear those external sounds a bit more clearly without me rambling over top of them. So do stay tuned for that. However, for those of you who are about to split with me now, thank you all very, very much for watching, and I definitely appreciate all of the wonderful support that you continue to show to me and to show to the channel. Until next time, though, Ferrari Man 601 saying stay tuned for the hot laps, and, of course, we will see you soon.